Good evening. My name is Phyllis Dickerson, Chief Executive Officer of the African American Mayors Association. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Transportation and Infrastructure, a conversation with Black mayors. Thank you for joining us today for a live stream panel discussion. Found in 2014, ALMA exists to empower African American mayors by expanding their executive capacity for the benefit of their cities. And we do so by elevating their voices to the national stage and providing them with the resources and best practices needed to govern their communities. Today's engagement is an opportunity for just that. Today's discussion will be both informative and resourceful. So let's get started. We're especially thankful to be joined today by U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Before we begin, it's my pleasure to introduce the Mayor of Houston, Texas, and the President of the African American Mayors Association, Mayor Sylvester Turner. Mayor Turner, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Phyllis, and it's good to be with you and Secretary Buttigieg and all these other terrific mayors. Look, good evening, and thank you for joining us today for a critical conversation on transportation and infrastructure in America. As mayor of Houston, Texas, and president of the African American Mayors Association, I am well aware of the issues facing our communities and the need for federal and local governments to work in tandem. Recent legislation proposed by the Biden administration represents a new contract with America, ushering in new jobs, better transportation systems, and middle class tax cuts, plus critical investments in high speed internet, lead pipe replacement, and solar facilities that serve low income Americans. These bills are exemplary of how the government can work for everyday people. As Black mayors, we're also deeply conscious of how crucial these investments are to start to reverse our nation's long history of environmental racism. The negative consequences are painfully clear. Black Americans are 3 times more likely to die from exposure to air pollutants than white Americans. Black communities have lower quality roads and transit systems than white areas. And Black, Latinx, and Native American people are more likely to live without running water and basic indoor plumbing than white Americans. Today's conversation with Black mayors will focus on how to improve our services both at the federal and local levels and incorporate great insights from a cabinet official charged with implementing these changes. Joining our conversation today is Special Guest Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg currently serves as the 19th Secretary of Transportation, having been sworn in on February 3rd of 2021. Prior to joining the Biden-Harris administration, Secretary Buttigieg served 2 terms as mayor of his hometown of South Bend, Indiana. A graduate of Harvard University and a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, Buttigieg served for 7 years as an officer in the U.S. Navy Reserve, taking a leave of absence from the mayor's office for deployment to Afghanistan in 2014. Returning to the Midwest after school, Secretary Buttigieg worked in the private sector and was elected mayor of South Bend in 2011 with a focus on delivering a new future for the city through a fresh approach to politics and bold ideas. Soon known as Mayor Pete, Buttigieg worked across the aisle to transform South Bend's future and improve people's everyday lives. His leadership helped spark citywide job growth and facilitated innovative public-private partnerships like Commuters Trust, a benefits program designed to improve the city's transportation experience for workers. In December 2020, he was nominated by then President-elect Biden to be Secretary of Transportation. He was confirmed by the Senate on February 2nd of 2021, becoming the first openly gay person confirmed to serve in the president's cabinet. Secretary Buttigieg lives with his husband, Chasten, their 2 children, Joseph and Penelope, and their 2 dogs. Please welcome Secretary Pete Buttigieg to today's conversation. Mayor Pete, welcome, Mr. Secretary.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor. It's great to be with you, and I appreciate the invitation to join this organization. And I'm mindful that our last conversation formally was one of my first as secretary, so it feels good a year later to come full circle and join you. I'm especially pleased to be gathering with you during Black History Month. It's a good time for us to acknowledge the long history of Black leadership and excellence in transportation. Innovators like Garrett Morgan, the inventor of the traffic light, Dr. Gladys B. West, the mathematician whose work made GPS possible, are on our minds, and we're actually going to be honoring Dr. West this month with a new plaque here at the DOT, and we'll be holding an event this month with two of my predecessors, great secretaries, Secretary Slater and Secretary Fox. Let me take just a couple minutes to share a couple of thoughts, and then I know we have a good conversation ahead. But what I really want to do is update you on some of the progress that we've made, President Turner, since we spoke in this forum a year ago. And I know I've been working with you and so many of the members of AAMA since then. Some of the things we've done is lay out equity and environmental justice as specific criteria for grant programs. And we've seen that not just affect the projects that win, but actually encourage more projects focused on those areas to apply in the first place. We've been working to increase DBE contracting, including implementing local hire provisions so that more workers come from the projects, the communities where the projects are happening. And we get away from this experience where people in neighborhoods look at the projects and the people working there and say, nobody here looks like they came from around here. And with your help, of course, maybe most significantly of all, we passed the most important infrastructure investment in our lifetimes. This is the biggest investment in public transit in history. It's going to establish a new Safe Streets and Roads for All program for cities because, as Mayor Turner cited, we have far too much disproportionate impact of safety issues and loss of life on our roads happening in Black communities. And we are directly confronting the history of transportation decisions in the past, sometimes dividing just as much as they connected. And that is reflected in this infrastructure law's first ever federal program to help cities reconnect communities that were displaced or divided in the past. That's just the transportation piece, by the way. We also have a lot to be proud of in this infrastructure bill when it comes to delivering broadband, delivering clean water, which of course every mayor has on their mind. And I'm proud to be part of a team doing that. So we are ready to partner with you to make sure that this funding does all that it could, including historic levels of it going directly to cities and towns, $45 billion in new competitive grant programs that local governments, mayors, and other local leaders can apply for directly. A year ago, I said that our department's commitments on these issues were not just February priorities or Black History Month priorities. This is our day in, day out work. We're proud of what we've been able to do in the last year, but in so many ways, we're just getting warmed up. So it's a great time for us to be having this conversation, and I'm so pleased to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and we appreciate the commitment that you're making to being with African American mayors today. So thank you, Secretary Buttigieg. Moderating our panel today is Second Vice President of the African American Mayors Association and Mayor of Mount Vernon, New York, Mayor Sean Patterson Howard. Joining her on today's panel is Mayor Val Lyles of Charlotte, North Carolina, Mayor LaToya Cantrell of New Orleans, Louisiana, Mayor Stephen Reed of Montgomery, Alabama, and Mayor Byron Brown of Buffalo, New York. Take it away, Mayor Patterson Howard. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, President Turner, for the introduction and for ensuring that we have the platform to host this discussion today. And again, thank you, Secretary Buttigieg, because as you said, it was about a year ago that you participated in a listening session. And we've seen since that listening session, the implementation of some of the things that we shared as AMA mayors. And so I want to jump right into it, and I'm glad to be joined by my fellow mayors from across the country, north, south, east, west. We're all represented here today. And I just want to jump into something. There are several great new programs in the bipartisan infrastructure law, but our mayors are particularly focused on opportunities to right past wrongs of infrastructure investment, such as
Reconnecting Communities program. Can you talk a little bit more about the department's strategy on transportation equity?
Absolutely, and thanks for the conversations that have helped shape our work on this. I remember in particular, Mayor, you're pointing out that residents in your community might have an easier time getting to Manhattan than across town to the grocery, and that stuck with me as we were talking about what it means to actually ensure that transportation meets its potential to connect rather than to divide. So in terms of what that actually means, first of all, the first ever Reconnecting Communities program, that's a dedicated $1 billion specifically for funding to state, local, MPO, and other government units that have ideas for how to bridge across those kinds of divisions, planning, design, sometimes demolition, sometimes reconstruction, sometimes new transit, anything that connects over or under or around or through those seams or whatever we want to call them that we know are in just about every community. And I'm really excited about what we can do to show how those dollars can be put to work. And I think build the case for there to be more where that came from. Now, that's one piece of it, but that's far from the only piece. Our RAISE grant program itself, and it was renamed RAISE, Rebuilding American Infrastructure Sustainably and Equitably, is the same program formerly known as Tiger or Build. Because we really want to emphasize that our flagship discretionary program needs to be tuned to address some of these issues. That's now going to be $15 billion over the next 5 years, thanks to the increase in funding represented by the President's bill. And our first expanded notice of funding opportunity totals $1.5 billion. The infra program, which is also very flexible and very useful for local governments. Also, one that we're going to be paying special attention to opportunities to enhance equitably the transportation people rely on. We're also thinking about business opportunity here. And we are not only stepping up outreach to DBEs directly, but we're talking a lot with the biggest construction companies in the country that are often the primes on these opportunities about what they in turn are doing to cultivate capacity among small businesses and DBEs, because we know that we have got to have that commitment within the private sector if we're going to actually increase access in terms of Black-owned, for example, and women-owned businesses. Then there's the worker side of it. That's why this local hire piece is so important. We know there are so many good paying jobs that are available, but not always viewed as belonging to communities, especially communities of color, that just have not traditionally or generationally been part of the trades. And we're making clear our expectation and partnering with those locals that they're doing a good job in making those doors more widely open. So those are a few examples of what we're pursuing right now. And you can feel the momentum right now. Compared to a year ago when we were excited about what we were going to do, but hadn't yet gotten there. Just one last point I want to mention. It turns out the education piece has been really important here. As you may know, if you followed my public comments on this, there's been something of a backlash to mentioning the reality that transportation infrastructure decisions have divided communities.
Right.
To me, it was a matter of simple historical fact that we are acknowledging, by the way, not to beat anybody up or make people feel uncomfortable, but because we have an obligation as well as an opportunity to do something about it, why wouldn't we? Why would everybody better off? And so we're also going to continue just making plain the facts of the case, how we got here, why that phrase wrong side of the tracks, which is a transportation metaphor, is in our vocabulary. And just as importantly, what we're going to do about it.
So just another question, and then we're going to go to our panelists and ask them questions and give them an opportunity. What can we do as Black mayors across the country to help implement this bipartisan infrastructure law and deliver this generational investment to our communities? Because this is a generational investment, and have those hard conversations and support with that education.
Well, this is where your leadership is going to matter so much. Some of you were at the Conference of Mayors where I shared the reflection that, when I was a mayor, I thought that was the level of government where most things get done. Now that I'm in Washington, I know that to be the case. You're the tip of the spear. We are laying out the parameters and the standards. We're cutting the checks. but we don't actually procure very much at all relative to how many dollars go out for state and local partners to actually deploy. So the biggest thing I need you to do, frankly, is to succeed and to let us know how to help you, because we're not going to come up with the answers here in Washington. You know your communities. You know, for example, when we're talking about reconnecting communities, when a piece of infrastructure actually needs to move or be capped or come down, or when you can leave it right where it is, but we need to bridge around it or across it. You know what areas have been historically underserved and overburdened. You know where the biggest opportunity is. You know where the potential for leadership is. We just need to be lined up to help you deliver on that. And of course, again, this education piece, I think, is really important. You know, I don't think most people really care what's in which pot of funding or which program is associated with which federal acronym. But folks want to know what this is going to mean to them. And you are in a position to explain that to your residents and to explain to federal agencies like mine what we actually need to do to support you. We want to be a one-stop shop. And, you know, I know from my experience as a mayor knocking on the door of this very building where I'm sitting, trying to get answers, that it's not always easy to navigate these federal processes. And often it's smaller communities and more overburdened communities that are the ones we most need to support, that are going to have face the most burdens if we don't make these processes simpler. So we're doing things like taking some of our applications and trying to combine them. As you have a common application for college, so you don't have to navigate a different agency and a different pot of money and a different set of requirements every time you want to get something done. But that feedback, we're going to take it on board, and we're going to take it very seriously. And so we're counting on you to let us know, hey, this program's working really well for us, or you know, my people can't make heads or tails of this, and you got to make it simpler for us. We want that feedback so that we can be a more user-friendly agency for the mayors who are out there.
Thank you so much. Thank you for just not only being an active listener, but taking that information back. Because when we spoke about this a year ago, and we spoke about it at the United States Conference of Mayors, especially our smaller towns and communities, were speaking about technical assistance. And we received an incredible list of technical assistance opportunities that will be happening. And so we want to make sure that our mayors and our communities are looking out for that. So we want to jump on over to our panel right now. And we want to go in and just start with our Mayor LaToya Cantrell from New Orleans. Mayor Cantrell.
Yes, ma'am. How are you? Thank you to this great organization. And it's always good to be with my brother and sister mayors. Secretary Pete, you know, it's so good to hear your voice and just knowing the work that you did as mayor, but also coming in as a force, being the Secretary of Transportation, and just knowing the landscape on the ground. It means a lot, especially being in these positions we're in. You know, there are multiple things as it relates to the city of New Orleans. You know, we're 60% African American. So everything we do is focused on equity, and love the fact that that's been embraced by you, by the administration. We have been very intentional about creating and restructuring our transit system and planning, which we call it New Links, to improve the transit network across the board. And here recently, and thank you, I know our regional transit authority was awarded $5.6 million for our passenger ferry grant. So looking forward to executing that, but it's being leveraged already towards investments that we're making. So wanting you all to see the work that is happening on the ground so that we lay the foundation for you all to continue to support us. But one of the big pieces here is passenger rail, as I know we've had conversations about, and focusing on the leg between the city of New Orleans and Mobile, and hopefully getting, you know, to Baton Rouge, but connecting the dots are critical. And so the Surface Transportation Board hearings last week, you know, that the service will happen before the end of the year, really inspiring. But reinstating the leg to Mobile would be a big win. But we really want to push that even towards Florida. So going past Mobile, getting into Pensacola and the like. As I've seen, that gap is about $400 million to make it happen. So when I hear about the 45 billion set aside for us, but also the local, for us to be able to apply locally, that is truly what we need. And so thank you for that. But we'll be looking forward to applying to that as the city of New Orleans. Also on the EV side, we're installing over 30 charging stations right now that will be free to the public to access. But of course, we've been reviewing the national EV formula program guidance that was released on the 10th. And so we really want to make sure that we're creating for a sustainable charging network. That seems to be the most or the greatest concern that I have in terms of maintaining and ensuring that it lives on, after I'm in office or that we're in office, period. So it's about sustainability as well.
Thank you. Just very briefly, first of all, I share your enthusiasm and interest in Gulf Coast Rail, and I think we have some real progress ahead on that front. And part of what we have in mind, obviously, with this rail funding is to expand, to restore, and to improve, right? Where we already have rail service, but it needs to be faster, it needs to be more reliable. And a lot of that has to do with the requirements of the cargo rail companies whose rails Amtrak uses, but who are required by law to give Amtrak preference. And part of what the Surface Transportation Board is looking at is whether those legal requirements have been met. On the EV charging point, I'm so glad that you're paying attention to this. And I should point out that in addition to the $5 billion that we have launched, that the first piece of going out to the states through that formula program, and I know the states will take very seriously, at least they should, what mayors and communities have to say about how they make their plans. There will also be a competitive program that follows on the heels of that will help with the community charging that is going to be so important. Some areas, people mostly live in single family homes. They already have charging infrastructure. It's the plug in their wall. It may go a little slower, but you can charge a vehicle all day and all night. If you're in multifamily dwellings, it's a different story. And the urgency here is around the knowledge that it's actually low-income Americans who might benefit the most from the fuel savings and the maintenance savings of an EV, as long as two things are true: if they can afford it and if they can charge it. Yeah. And that charging piece is one that we think we have a lot of responsibility to get right, especially as we move away from this early stage where EVs are viewed as a luxury item, and move toward those being something that belong to everybody. So it's very forward-looking of you to be paying attention to that, and we want to support you, mayors like you, who are making sure that EV opportunity reaches everybody.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary, because the majority of our residents are renters in the city of New Orleans. Right. So thank you for that point.
Thank you so much, Mayor Lyles. Want to go on over to Mayor Brown?
Thank you very much. I want to thank the African American Mayors Association for this opportunity to speak with Secretary Buttigieg and to talk about the importance of infrastructure to our communities. In the city of Buffalo, we have developed a comprehensive shovel-ready infrastructure plan called the People's Infrastructure Agenda. It is over $300 million of shovel-ready projects that are ready to go that would improve the quality of life for people throughout our city, particularly in low-income communities. The fact that there is an application process and processes where money can come directly to cities, as Mayor Cantrell said, is extremely significant. Mayors being on the ground, understanding the needs of their communities, and being able to respond to those needs directly is critically important, as opposed to having the funds pass through another level of government. And while we have a great working relationship with our state government and work very closely with our state legislative delegation on priorities for our community, being able to have money come directly to the city of Buffalo for the urgent, pressing infrastructure needs that we've already been able to estimate is critically important. Also, like many of our partner cities, we have begun to install EV stations. We have started the installation of these stations in city parking ramps where people are able to utilize them in the ramps. We've also partnered with the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus, where we have many of our healthcare institutions co-located, and there are charging stations on the campus of the medical campus where literally thousands of people throughout the city, region, and beyond come for medical care. So this conversation is an extremely important one. We appreciate President Biden and the work that he's done to get this critical infrastructure funding into communities all across the country, and certainly want to say that we will spend wisely, we will spend efficiently, and we will spend with a focus on equity in the city of Buffalo.
Well, thank you for that proactive work. I have to tell you that the seeing that mayors in places like Buffalo have not waited for Washington allows us to make sure we hit the ground running now that there actually is this bipartisan law. And so whether we're talking about the EVs or the other infrastructure work that you're leading, we want to recognize that. And that is part of why you see the direct flow to cities. Some communities have the good fortune of being pretty aligned with the states. Some places that's not so true. But no matter what, one thing I've noticed, you may have heard me say this before, here in Washington, people say state and local in one breath as if it were the same thing. And any mayor or former mayor knows it's a little more complicated than that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to get to our other mayors in just one second. So cities like Mount Vernon represent a large swath of municipalities across the country. We're faced with smaller budgets, smaller teams, the same responsibilities and burdens as well-resourced communities. We've seen across our country that our infrastructure system has a C- average, but in smaller communities, it's more like an F because of lack of resources. And in an effort not to lay off staff, we've often allowed our infrastructure to crumble. I've closed 2 bridges. I closed one bridge today over our Metro North rail station, and I closed another bridge a month ago. And so that impacts public safety. Members of your team spoke about the off-system bridges and how monies are coming to states to make small communities and off-system bridges 100% refundable to the states, and that localities should not have to, especially those who are under-resourced, should not have to choose between getting a bridge done and finding millions of dollars to contribute to the project. Can you talk about, how we're working with some of the smaller under-resourced communities?
Yeah, this is a really important feature of the bridge program, and we made sure that there was a set aside of a floor, not a ceiling, on funds going to those off-system bridges. Previously there had been an 80-20 share, and that doesn't sound like much, 20% maybe, but as you know, that for a community, especially an under-resourced community, is the difference between it getting done or not getting done. And we recognize that, and that's part of why this program provides for that 100% share. I'm sorry to hear that you've had to close another bridge, and we're seeing this in so many parts of the country. And when a bridge is closed, or even if it just has a load limit put on it for safety reasons, that is a convenience issue. It is a quality of life issue. It's also a supply chain issue, right? It's about moving goods as well as people to where they need to be. And a lot of folks don't realize how many of our bridges are actually maintained at the local level. So in addition to this program that's making a lot of news to address 10 major economically significant bridges, We also envision being able to repair up to 15,000 bridges that might be a little less nationally recognized, but are incredibly important to the communities that they're in. And we're eager to work with you on making sure that we can deliver that and support your prioritization of the bridges that need the most attention.
Thank you so much. So we want to go over to our Mayor, Vi Lyles.
Thank you very much, Mayor. All of my mayor friends that are here, and thanks to the association for this. And Mr. Secretary, good to see you, and thank you for your visit to Charlotte. I want to talk a little bit about what we are trying to do around the issue of equity in our community and why it is so important for the infrastructure and transportation systems to reflect what we can do to remove some of the barriers that we have had by law and ordinance and practice and custom, especially when you're in our part of the country, which we consider pretty much the Sun Belt states. Charlotte has developed a mobility plan, but that mobility plan really needs the support of everyone in this community to be able to create successful opportunities. We were 50th out of 50 largest cities in economic mobility. And transportation is really very well connected to that metric that we have. Think about how much it costs to own a car, the gas, the maintenance, the taxes, and all of those things that we have that makes it impossible almost for someone in a suburban community to have an efficient way of transportation without a car. We're a car-centric city. But what we want to become is a mobility city that has rail and buses. We believe that the jobs are going to be located where jobs are. And what we want to do is create the ability for mass transit, whether it be trains or buses, for our citizens to get from home to work in a reasonable amount of time. And in order to do that, we have to have this investment. And I want to say thank you for the infrastructure bill. Thank you for the opportunities for us to apply for mass transit. We really want people in our community to have access. And that access often didn't exist before. And the only plan that we have is if we create the various modes. And I've talked about the rail, the buses, but even our sidewalks and our bike plans, our greenways, all of these are opportunities for people to have a quality of life that they don't have right now. So we are also doing the electric vehicle charging stations. We have drafted an ordinance that requires development to include EV stations around the city. And we're doing that with a lot of support by our development community, and especially those that see the value of development and having clean air. 40% of our bad air comes from transportation initiatives. And to correct that, we want to say thank you for the electric bus support. We want to say thank you for considering what we see as rail that connects transit so that people can move around the city. It's all about quality of life for us and creating opportunities for those that have not been able to access opportunities just because of the color of their skin or the location of their home. We've just got to have the support. And I want to say thank you for the plan and doing what you're doing. It's making a real difference here.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your support of the plan and for hosting us. I really enjoyed the visit that we took with the Vice President to highlight some of what's going on with that next generation transit that you're building out. And I think there's something really fitting, poetic even, about how you link economic mobility with physical transportation mobility. And there's no question that those things go together. We're talking about connecting people to opportunity. And I'm particularly interested in some of the opportunities in less dense and perhaps more historically conservative areas of the country that are more organized around cars, but have every opportunity for good transit, complete streets, and other things that have maybe in the past been viewed as a big city phenomenon, but that people in every part of this country should benefit from.
Thank you so much. And now we want to go on over to our Mayor, Stephen Reed.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson Howard. Secretary Buttigieg, honored to be with you. Thanks so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk with us today, and really appreciate the work that you and the administration have done on this issue. So many of my colleagues have touched on topics that I wanted to address, and so I guess I'm just going to kind of piggyback on a couple of those, in particular around electric vehicles. And some of what you mentioned just now is how do we get into the conversations of changing habits and changing patterns and practices in less dense areas. Certainly in parts of the South and mid-sized cities like Montgomery, we've been focused obviously on gas driven vehicles. We have not been able to implement the type of charging stations that Mayor Brown has done and some of the other mayors have done in their cities. How do we begin the conversation around shifting those practices with our communities when some are saying, hey, Mayor, you're talking about putting in charging stations over here. I just need to be able to get my bus to come here on time. I need micro transit to get me from point B to C, and you're over here on third base and I'm just trying to get to first. How do we, kind of begin that conversation, and how can the Department of Transportation under the Biden administration assist us in doing that? And the second part I would ask of that question is, once we have the conversation at a local level about why we should do it, how do we then make sure that we have the support in order to actually implement these changes so that we can move forward in how we imagine our cities? In Montgomery, we're moving forward to become a truly smart city, but we know that means that we have to invest in our transportation infrastructure, and we want to make sure that we have those things in place so that we can achieve that. And so what resources and what support structure does the Department of Transportation under your leadership offer mayors like myself, both in terms of communicating some of the pros of this to our communities, and then supporting that initiative at the ground level to ultimately start doing what Mayor Cantrell and Mayor Lyles and Mayor Pastor Howard and others have done already in their community, for those of us that are kind of, just getting going on this. And then my third question is really, what can we do to help you? How can we help you here at AMA? How can we help the Biden administration as mayors amplify what has been done and what needs to be done, whether it be at the state level or even at the federal level?
Well, thanks for everything you're doing to push this forward. And the biggest thing you can do to help us is to succeed. I mean, if we are pulling in the same direction and you're delivering the results that show to the people who count on you that these policy directions in transportation make people better off in their daily lives, then we all win. I take the point about going out talking about EV chargers when folks are just trying to get across town or get to work. It's one of the reasons why we've got to make sure we have strong support for transit and micromobility. I mean, everything from bikes and scooters to having a bus that comes, especially in communities that are big enough to have a transit system, but not dense enough to have a very strong one, right? The bus exists, but it only comes once an hour and it stops running at 5. And you're asking people to get downtown and then back out to go from kind of 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the kind of a periphery of the city. That's part of where we've got to support transit agencies that have taken such a beating during COVID. And we're doing it with the dollars that are in this infrastructure law. The other thing we got to do, though, is just, frankly, I think a little bit on the cultural side, right? Because EVs came into our consciousness as this coastal city luxury thing. And that might be how they started. But the story's very different now. We've already reached the point, if you're able to get financing, we've already reached the point where you're probably pound for pound going to save a little bit by buying the electric model of a car over the regular combustion model. If you really add up the gas savings and the maintenance savings, there's fewer moving parts. But seeing is believing, right? And a lot, you're asking people to take a risk by doing that. That's assuming they can get that upfront cost together in the first place. So we've got to make sure the economics keep moving in the right direction, but just the feel of it, right? And actually, the South is a very interesting place to do this, right? You got because you got the job story. I mean, Hyundai, Mercedes making doing production of the EV side in Alabama, Georgia, where Rivian is up and running. You got the electric vehicle battery manufacturing picking up steam. So this comes to be viewed with a sense of pride right? As part of how we're creating jobs and creating opportunity. I think those pickup ads in the Super Bowl did as much as 100 speeches from me to help people see that maybe the EV revolution is for them. So maybe you're not buying a $60,000 Tesla, but an F-150. Now, if we had our way with Build Back Better, that sticker price on that F-150 would fall from about 40 to about 28 with those incentives. And we're going to continue advancing our belief that there ought to be incentives to buy down the cost. But even now, we're getting to that point where the economics add up. The problem, of course, is they're not happening equitably enough for people to be able to get into that EV revolution. That's why the chargers matter. So the way I would frame it, not that I can give you advice on how best to speak to your community, but as I'm having the national conversation, the way we're talking about it is, look, people are already taking advantage of these savings, and you ought to get a piece of that. You deserve to be in on this as well. And we're setting you up for that success. But I'm very interested to know what's working as you have these conversations in your community and what barriers people are hitting too. So let's keep this as a two-way street and learn from one another in moving these things forward.
Thank you so much. And whether you're rural or whether you're densely populated, in your densely populated communities, you're dealing with high rates of asthma. Yes. and other problems, and those communities desperately need EV infrastructure. And as we used some of our American Rescue Plan monies to buy 20 police cars, none of them could be electric because we have no EV infrastructure here, even as a municipality. And so it makes it a hard option even for our residents. But in communities of color, EV infrastructure is so critical because, again, whether you're dense or you're scattered, the breathing issues are all of the same. And so those EV infrastructures are going to be critical to our community, especially as our auto industry is saying they're moving towards electric fully in 2030. So we don't have as much time as we thought we had. So I know, Secretary, that you have to go and you have to move. I don't know if you have one quick question. James Wright wants to know what role has DO played in the proposed maglev train between Baltimore and DC. A maglev train will make the DC-Baltimore trip go from an hour to 15 minutes. So is DOT working on that?
So we have seen the proposals there, and I think right now that's going through a permitting process to look at the right-of-way and what would have to happen in order for that to move forward. And I know there are local project sponsors who are trying to put together the funding. Look, whether we're talking about maglev, whether we're talking about some of these further out ideas like Hyperloop that are really exciting, or just what people in a lot of parts of the world would call a good old-fashioned train, but we would think of as pretty high speed. We need to make sure that we're investing in rail and in alternatives for people to get around. And we'll continue to have a lot of excitement. As you know, I thought I was the biggest train guy around, and then I met this president, and I can only hope to be the second biggest passenger rail enthusiast in this administration. But we really want this to be something that benefits people in every part of the country. So I know time is short, and this conversation went by quickly, but my colleagues have been following along, Maurice Henderson, Senior Advisor in my office, and Will Raskey from our Government Affairs team, who can follow up on anything specific that you and your staffs and your communities are working on or working with. Again, I really mean it when I say that we want to make these processes as user-friendly as they can be, and that can be a tall order for federal programs and agencies. So that's something we really rely on your input in order to get right. But with you delivering, as you've been delivering this whole time, and us putting some dollars behind that, some historically significant dollars, I think that we're going to be able to mark these years that we're in these roles as a transformative time for what transportation can mean for those very communities that have been left out in the past. And that's where there are moral as well as logistical stakes to us doing this well. And I have every expectation and hope that we can do it, but I can't do it. We can't do it alone. Certainly can't do it without your leadership. So thank you for everything you're doing collectively as an organization and individually in your cities. Thanks for the chance to address you. And I know that I'll see you individually and collectively many times in the near future.
And thank you so much for taking out the time to be with us today. Thank you for being a partner with AMA. And we're looking forward, hopefully, to seeing you at our national conference in DC, April 27th through 29th, or some of your staff, so that we can continue this very important conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you again, Secretary.
Thank you. Great
Thank
visit.
you.
Thanks.
So thank you, everyone. We're going to continue this conversation here with our mayors. Our secretary has to step away, but we still have incredible and dynamic mayors here on the line. And so I want to just look at one more question, well, a few more questions from our audience. The question has been, how will we as African-American mayors continue to share this knowledge with other communities throughout the country? How are we going to transfer this knowledge and make sure that all of our communities can benefit? It says these are great opportunities, and we want to make sure that we're building these relationships and that these relationships are not lost.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Well, I would say make sure that you're a member of the association and encourage others to be a part of it. In my city, I try very hard to meet once a month with all of the mayors that are in my community, in my county. And then I meet once a quarter with those that are in my surrounding region. And building the relationship so that we can support each other is one of the things that I believe is really the best way to move a city forward and a region, because you have to have the support of the people around you. But I find the support from the African American mayors to be so valuable, the participation in the programming. And I just jotted down the date of the conference because I did not know that. So that's what I would suggest.
I agree.
Absolutely. It's very important. You know, we're not just mayors of cities, but we hold important positions in our region. And so transportation is a community issue, but it's definitely a regional issue. Many of our residents work in suburbs and rural areas around and surrounding our community. So we want to make sure that we're creating a regional transportation strategy. One of the other questions here, and this
Mayor
can be,
Patterson Howard.
Yes,
can
sir.
I jump in on that question before you go too far? And I don't want to be a contrarian, but let me just say that I think we also need help from those that are within our regions and at the state level.
Absolutely.
I can tell you in Alabama, what I find is that there seems to be a regional competition with the business center, and most of us represent those business centers or the urban center of our regions. And when you get to some of the state funding and some of the state partnerships that are needed to complete these projects, we run into some roadblocks. In particular, those of us that are in states where conservatives, Republicans dominate our state legislatures, and those projects don't seem to catch. And one of the things I shared, and I would answer this question by saying, is I try to speak not only to the mayors, but to realtors, our business groups, and even our civic groups, and those who may not share the same political philosophy that I share, to in particular connect the dots for them and draw the picture for them in terms of why they need the urban center to be strong, even for their bedroom communities, even for their suburban communities, or their exurbs. And what I kind of challenge them to try to do is to help us, because at the end of the day, it's going to benefit everybody. Not everyone who works in Charlotte, lives in Charlotte, same in New Orleans, same in Buffalo, and Mount Vernon and Montgomery, and most of the cities that many of the AMA members represent. But I think that what is important for the audience to understand is there's a lot that we can do, but we can't do it all by ourselves. And it takes that cooperation regionally to understand that regardless of how things may have been, the way things are right now is that we're running the urban centers, and the transportation projects are going to begin and end there. And it helps us to have the cooperation of those in the region when it comes time for us to do things in underserved communities, just like they want things done in those brand new communities. And I don't think it has to be either or, in particular under this administration, but it's important for them to help us in some areas where maybe our voices aren't as strong in some of those areas where people may lean or may have a different philosophy than one that we may have around transportation and around really trying to bring equity to all of these investments that are out there.
I fully agree with you. Mount Vernon is literally, we share a border with New York City, and so we benefited from their transportation plan. And as you heard the secretary say in the beginning, one of our challenges, though, is while we have benefited from regional transportation planning, it's hard for us to get from one side of our community to the other because the train tracks have come through, and now it requires bridges to get from one side to the other, and those bridges are crumbling. So we have to look at everything at the same time. We have to make sure our urban centers are working with our suburbs, but that our suburban communities understand the importance of what's happening in the urban centers, because that's where many of their residents work. That's where they commute to on a daily basis. And so we have to not be as competitive as we are collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be critical. One of the other questions is, how are you layering your infrastructure strategy when it comes to transportation? And hold on, let me just get back up to it because it was a good question. It said, how are you planning to coordinate the roads, the water, and the sewer, and the broadband deployment? Because we all are dealing with crumbling roads. I think one of the biggest issues that mayors have across the country is potholes. But as we begin to pave roads, how are we also dealing with some of our sewer infrastructure, our broadband infrastructure that we have to lay, as well as the clean water infrastructure that we have to do all over again? So how are you coordinating those efforts in your communities?
Well, Mayor Patterson Howard, as you indicated, this federal funding is a generational opportunity for all of our communities. So it really takes comprehensive planning, working with other levels of government, working with the private sector, and working with the residents of the community to put planning in place that address all of those issues: roads and broadband, charging stations, water lines, sewer lines, and making sure that that work is coordinated so that you're not working in one sphere of importance from an infrastructure perspective, and then months later or a year later, then digging up that infrastructure investment you made because you did not coordinate. So coordination of all of this spending and planning is critically important. We have a comprehensive planning process in the city of Buffalo where we work with all of the utilities, where we work with the private sector, where we work with other levels of government, so that as we spend these precious generational resources, we are spending it wisely so that it has the most effect on all of our residents, and so that it addresses equity concerns as well for those low-income residents of our community. And as all of you have touched on, and Secretary Buttigieg said, we want to tie economic mobility with transportation mobility so that we are lifting low-income residents out of poverty as we make these critical investments.
And I would agree 100% with the comments made by Mayor Brown in terms of and Patterson Howard in regards to the coordination. And then we also have opportunities like in the city of New Orleans, where we have been in the midst of all of this infrastructure work prior to the adoption of IJA, prior to even COVID-19, and looking at water, sewage. We've embraced a dig once policy where we're coordinating joint infrastructure projects with our sewage and water board, with our Department of Public Works, with technology. And I just wanted to add or fold in one other component, which is housing. as we're thinking about all the various components of infrastructure, we cannot leave out affordable housing, and we're looking through and making sure that it's embedded in that level of coordination.
Absolutely. So I just want to thank everyone for this very dynamic conversation. Any questions we did not get an opportunity to get to, we will go back and respond to in the chat. So we're asking if everyone can do that. And with that being said, again, thank you to my fellow mayors, Mayor Vilaus, Mayor Cantrell, Mayor Brown, and Mayor Reed. And at this time, we're going to hand it back over to our CEO of AMA, Phyllis Dickerson, who's helped put this all together. So thank you always, Phyllis, for ensuring that AMA is at the table. And I want to encourage any mayors out there that are not a part of AMA, please, this is the organization to join. We are focused on ensuring that our mayors and our communities are at the table. This is the time. Become a part of AMA. Thank you, Phyllis.
Great
Thank
job,
you.
Mayor Patterson Howard, I have to say. Sorry. Great job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. For those of you who we didn't get an opportunity to answer your questions, we did capture the question and we will be sending out the answer. We've recorded today's session and we'll make it available online. Special thanks to our Intergovernmental Affairs colleague. A shout out to Charles Small and Maurice Henderson at the Department of Transportation for their partnership in coordinating today's event. We appreciate Secretary Buttigieg for his time and participation. Thank you to our member mayors, Mayor Patterson Howard, Mayor Lyles, Mayor Cantrell, Mayor Reed, and Mayor Brown for their participation as well. Stay tuned for more information about upcoming AMA events, including our 2022 annual conference hosted here in DC, April 27th through 29th. Be sure to follow us on social media at Our Mayors and visit us online at ourmayors.org. Thank you for joining us today. This concludes this session.